I'm going to be talking about information that you need to know before coming to Canada with inadmissibility. If you are deemed inadmissible to Canada due to a past criminal offense made in or outside of Canada, in order for you to come to Canada, you must first overcome that inadmissibility. In order to overcome your inadmissibility, you either have to apply for a temporary resident permit or criminal rehabilitation. There are a lot of Americans that assume that it is easy to come to Canada just because it's across the border, and they don't realize that there is some eligibility requirements and some documentation that you must provide to immigration before coming to Canada, especially with inadmissibility. Furthermore, if you've had a criminal offense from 40 years ago and you just forgot about it, a lot of times when you cross the border, an immigration officer will stop you and will refuse you entry into Canada. In some circumstances, you may have had entry before, but in some circumstances, depending on the immigration officer, they can stop you and refuse your entry to Canada. Before coming to Canada with inadmissibility, it is important to know certain questions that you should ask immigration professionals before coming to Canada or before applying for a temporary resident permit or criminal rehabilitation. Questions such as, what are the forms and documentation that you need to provide for a temporary resident permit? What are the forms and documentations for a criminal rehabilitation application? Other questions such as, what does it mean to be inadmissible? That you've entered Canada before and now are refused entry and you would like to know why. And last but not least, another question that you could ask is that the immigration officer had told you that you were inadmissible and you don't understand why. So it is important to ask these questions and find out exactly what is required for you in order to be deemed admissible to Canada. Once you address your questions and your concerns to an immigration consultant or an immigration professional, they will be able to determine whether or not the documentation that you are providing is sufficient, and they will be able to let you know what is the best solution for your certain circumstance. In order to have high chances of successful entry into Canada, it is important to be well prepared and have a good collection of forms, documentation, and any evidence that you can provide to prove that you should be granted entry into Canada and that you are forgiven of your offenses. Of course, the forms that you provide do depend on which application you're going to apply for, whether it is a temporary resident permit or a criminal rehabilitation. Once you submit all of this documentation, forms, evidence, the discretion is up to the immigration officer, and they will in fact determine whether or not you are able to enter Canada. Therefore, it is completely out of the hands of the immigration professionals as well as yourself. However, if you do give a strong application and provide sufficient documentation and evidence, hopefully the application will be strong enough and you will be gained access to Canada and have successful entry. There are some factors that the immigration officer will analyze and look for to see whether or not you have been deemed admissible or have overcome your inadmissibility. Such factors include an explanation for your offenses, whether or not your behavior has changed since the offenses, and conclusively whether or not your behavior and your lifestyle has changed for the better, and that you are very unlikely to reoffend. Ultimately, with all of these factors taken into consideration, they will determine whether or not you would be a risk to Canadian society. If not, then hopefully you will be deemed admissible and you will overcome your inadmissibility. Many Canadians are concerned with their chances of entry into the United States with the new immigration laws that are coming into effect. However, it's surprising because the Americans are actually being denied entry more so than the Canadians. Surprisingly enough, Americans are actually being refused entry into Canada, which is quite surprising for a lot of Americans. Over the past year, in 2016, over 30,000 Americans were refused entry into Canada, which is a 31% increase compared to last year. In 2014, in comparison with 2016, over 7,000 Americans were denied entries. With this information, it is very important for Americans to be proactive and find out information on whether or not they can come to Canada and what requirements they need to abide by in order to come to Canada with no issues. Once again, being well prepared and having the appropriate documentation provided to the immigration officer will increase your chances of successful entry. Nevertheless, it is not only Americans who are being denied entry into Canada. There are also a plethora of other countries that are being denied entry into Canada all at the same time. For instance, the largest number of people that are refused entry come from Mexico, China, India, Colombia, Ecuador, Saudi Arabia, and France. Therefore, if you are not an American and you are coming from one of these countries or any other country in the world, it is important to be well prepared, well informed, and knowledgeable of what is required from you before entering Canada. It is extremely important for you to ask these questions and be well informed of what is required from you in order to gain access and entry into Canada with an inadmissibility issue. If you have any questions or concerns that you would like to address to an immigration professional, we are here to help you out at Akrami & Associates. We have many cases of criminal inadmissibility, and we can help you out and give you the best advice that we can. We have been doing this for a very long time, and if you have any questions, you can definitely contact us. Thank you so much, and hope to see you soon.